Cool. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the final session of the day and for sticking with us. I'm Hannah. I'm our service development team leader at Softcat and also the cloud product manager, which means that I design and develop lots of new services in the cloud area to take out to you as customers. I'd like to welcome you all to the final session, an audience with Softcat and TechUK, where we're going to be answering all of your questions about all things cloud. And I know a lot of you have been submitting questions on Slido throughout the day, so we'll be getting to those, but there'll also be a chance to ask some live questions as well if there's anything more that you haven't had a chance to submit. And just to note, after this, we'll have the networking drinks downstairs in the arches, so make sure to stick around for that as well. I'm going to start with some quick introductions. So just to reintroduce Matt and Dean to start with. So Matt's our head of cloud here at Softcat, so leads our strategic direction for all things cloud as a business. Dean is our field chief technologist, so working with customers on all their complex problems and challenges and helping them with a strategic direction. And then Laura is joining us from TechUK as the head of the program of technology and innovation. She's really passionate about emerging and transformative technologies. Got lots of insights to share with us today. So Laura, would you be happy to introduce yourself in a bit more depth?
Yeah, sure, happy to. Just making sure that everyone can hear me with the mic on. Yeah, I can see. Yeah, good. So hi, everyone. My name is Laura, and I am the head of program for tech and innovation at TechUK. For those of you who don't know, TechUK is the UK's technology trade association. Essentially, what that means is that we work with the UK tech sector to kind of showcase how technologies in the UK are being used to empower the society, our economy, and of course, the planet as well. We have around 850 members, Softcat being one of them. But our members work across lots of different technologies, from cloud to edge to quantum, even the metaverse, which we might get onto a little bit later on today. My job specifically at TechUK is to address some of those emerging trends which are coming up in tech. So under my program, we look at lots of different technologies, those that are in the here and now, such as cloud, and those that are coming on a little bit later down the line, but we really need to start thinking about how they're being commercialized. And for that, I'm talking about technologies like quantum. I'll stop there.
Cool. Thanks, Laura. So earlier, Matt and Dean had a chance to talk a little bit about some of the trends that they're seeing in the market. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about some of the trends that you've noticed in your role at TechUK as well?
Yeah, sure, happy to. So there's lots of trends, so I could take this in pretty much any direction, but I will highlight just two trends which I think kind of fits in with some of the themes that have been talked about today. So the first one that I really wanted to highlight is the idea of the convergence of computing. By that I mean all these different technologies that we use for compute, so cloud, of course, but also high performance computing, edge computing, AI, machine learning, and quantum, all coming together to enable rapid progress or rapid innovation in our computing power here in the UK. I guess one of the big drivers for this, and it kind of fits into the conversation this morning around data, is just the explosion of data that we are creating as businesses. And we need the right computing power to be able to understand that data and to be able to draw conclusions from that data and then equally create products and services based off that data. And to do that, increasingly, we're needing to kind of bring these technologies together. One example of this, and I don't work for the Met Office, so my knowledge on this is a little bit blurry, but think about weather forecasting, for example. That takes a heck of a lot of compute. And right now, they use lots of very complex systems involving high-performance computing, but increasingly, they're looking at ways that they can bring quantum algorithms into that to really enhance that computing power. And that's going to make weather forecasting so much more accurate. Whilst we might think it's quite accurate here in the UK, but in countries kind of like Japan, for example, weather forecasting can be really crucial because it can lead to quite significant weather changes quite quickly that can lead to national disasters, so on and so forth. So that is one of the themes I wanted to highlight. You're going to hear it more and more over the coming years, particularly because UK government, DCMS and BEIS have just announced the Future of Compute review. So that means UK government are actually actively looking at how this is going to be a national asset here in the UK. So it's gonna be a big theme going ahead. And the key takeaway from that is that convergence of compute, but also convergence of technologies is going to be crucial in the coming years. Sticking kind of on that convergence theme, another hot topic that we see coming up time and time again, and I think some of you might roll your eyes at this, but it is the metaverse. Now, we all have very, very different definitions of what the metaverse is, depending on kind of our knowledge of it. And just for the sake of the couple of minutes that I'm talking here, I will just define the metaverse as interconnected virtual worlds that we can engage with the internet, or what will be called Web 3.0, in an immersive and interoperable way. What is really exciting about the metaverse is that it's going to open a whole array of new business services, a whole new aspect to the UK economy. And there's going to be different types of metaverses. So how you and I can go watch a Taylor Swift concert if she ever does go back on tour, for example. Can we do that in the metaverse? But also, how can you access healthcare and health services through the metaverse? It's going to be really exciting themes that we're just on the cusp of understanding right now, because the metaverse isn't going to happen for a number of years. The key there is that it isn't going to happen, but we do have the technologies here and now that can make it happen. So it's all about how these technologies are going to converge in the coming years and advance in the coming years, and that's going to enable things like the metaverse. So there's two themes. I've probably got about another 50 I could mention, but I'll stop there for now.
Thanks. That's really exciting stuff, actually. Very interesting. Cool. So we're going to move on to some of the questions that you've all been submitting on Slido throughout the day. So excited to put these to your panelists now. So first one, when do we think we're going to start to see some more mainstream adoption of areas like AR, VR, XR, and what do you think is blocking this at the moment? So do you know who wants to take that one first?
I'm happy to.
Go for it. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I feel like I'm hogging the limelight. I mean, those lights are very bright. So. Okay, so when are we going to start seeing mainstream adoption of emerging technologies? Again, quite broad. There's lots of different forms of emerging technologies, and it's not going to be like in 5 years from now, you're all going to be tech experts on every single technology that exists out there. Like, that's just not how it works. But what we are seeing in the UK is that for some emerging technologies, we're definitely seeing the conversation move from an if and to a when. One technology where this is happening is quantum. Personally, it's my favorite topic right now. I can talk for a long time on quantum. But in the UK, we've had a long-standing National Quantum Technologies Programme since 2014, which has really built a strong academic hub around quantum technologies here in the UK. And then in 2020, we had something called the Strategic Intent, which was announced, and that announced the development of something called a National Quantum Computing Centre. Now, what is key about a National Quantum Computing Centre is that it shows the move from that kind of academic research perspective to how are we going to start utilising these technologies. And that kind of step change from research to commercialisation is that step change from not if, but when. And I think when you start to see that kind of conversation happen, it's really quite exciting and really quite... It kind of signals to you guys that you need to start looking at some of these emerging technologies. But obviously, that is different than mainstream adoption. So saying they're going to happen is very different than mainstream adoption. So I think I'll pause there and let you guys come in.
So I mean, we've already seen certain augmented reality technologies going into mainstream industries. We've got examples where people are using augmented reality and remote assistance through wearable tech to resolve issues on oil rigs, as an example. You know, flying out to oil rigs to fix some engineering challenges or problems. That isn't something that's sustainable. So being able to do that through remote assistance or assist technologies using wearable headsets, that's happening today. It's happening in all different industries. Construction using digital twins and things like that, using these kind of augmented reality headsets to be able to map what they're going to be building and architecting. That's happening today. So we are seeing it, I think, in certain industries, definitely starting to come in. And certainly we're working with Tech Data, who's a distributor, where we can demo some of that technology and showcase some of that capability using, HoloLens 2 as an example. So yeah, we've got some stuff coming out actually over the next few months. Got the Microsoft team here, so if you want to catch up with them, they can talk a bit about that. But certainly we're seeing it in the mainstream. If you've got a use case, certainly wearing the headsets, putting it on and experiencing it, it does seem to open up quite a lot of opportunity to think how it can relate to your organisation or industry. So we think that is already mainstream in some cases, and if it's not, it certainly will become something you'll be thinking about.
Yeah, AR/VR is so fascinating. Leicestershire Fire Service have been using it since 2016 for training their staff, so they don't have to burn a building so they can train. They can do that all in virtual reality.
Good stuff. And I'm just sit still on the Taylor Swift thing.
Yeah. That's amazing.
She's not going to tour again.
We don't know, okay?
Never know. Cool. Should we move on to the next one? So I kind of maybe split this in half. What are TechUK seeing in terms of the never-ending cloud skills bubble, but also what are Softcat seeing? So are we noticing anything different, maybe from each perspective? Matt,
Me
do you want-
first, or me?
Yeah. No chance to speak yet, so.
What are we seeing? I think we touched on this morning in terms of there's that shift of either having to have continued deep pockets to recruit the latest, greatest cloud, but more so data-related skills and or digital. But I think there's the emergence of and or growth in not just home and self-learning, but traditional companies out there, for example, Fastlane and other companies that Softcat work with, name slips on mine now, that specialize in taking what was very traditional mechanisms to upskill people in things like Microsoft Office, but now progressing into things like DevOps, digital, data, AI, specific learning tracks for those skills in the workplace, because they're recognizing that actually those things need to be in a more abundance in a workplace than the other traditional skills they were recruiting for. So we're seeing a lot of that. We're also seeing a lot and a big pull, as I touched on this morning, around apprenticeships and recruitment from schools and colleges. We take, I think it's something like 250 grads on average a year, and I think probably around 50 or so apprenticeships. So quite a significant number of early stage adopters into the tech industry. And I think that for me is the key way in which we can build a sustainable pipeline across all sectors and all organizations for cloud and data related skills.
So at TechUK, we see the cloud skills shortage as part of a wider digital skills shortage here in the UK. It is not just cloud, the cloud industry, which is obviously struggling with this. We did, so in the Queen's speech, we did welcome that there was a focus on digital skills. So that is a positive step from government, but we think at this point, UK government does need to get more involved in this conversation to figure out how we can upskill people here in the UK. One idea that we do have at TechUK is a lifelong loan entitlement, which can be incredibly flexible. So if you do want to go back and upskill and study, you have the ability to do that. We do know that there's going to be a huge deficit in digital careers in the UK in the next 5 years. I think it's Nesta said that we're going to need to fill 1.4 million digital careers in the next 5 years, and we do not have the capacity to do that here in the UK in the short term. So we need to think about how we can find people to fill that gap, whether it is through upskilling, whether it is through international collaboration. It's going to be important. Having that short-term and long-term strategy for skills as a business is going to be crucial. One topic I did want to bring up, I'm not an expert on it, but I'm going to hand over to Dean. And that is the idea of low-code and no-code. One way that you can mitigate the skills shortage is by making sure that your tools and products and services are accessible as possible. And one way to do that is through low-code. So,
yeah, I mean, it's one of those areas that you don't typically focus on, but it's that, and we mentioned it in the keynote earlier, actually, it's the automation piece, being able to create efficiency in the workforce, being able to understand how your users are using their technology and doing their jobs, and actually starting to process map those components out of manual task, and then creating automation in how they do their roles and empowering them and skilling them to be able to do no-code based development, essentially. And we're seeing that as an emerging area where you don't need to upskill too much. Some of these tools are at the disposal based on investing in Microsoft 365 and Microsoft's acquisition of technology a few years ago, which now is Power Platform. So that next stage of being able to empower the users to understand how they can be empowered to create efficiencies in their manual tasks, that actually we think has got a lot of room and a lot of development that can be factored into an upskilling. We sell products like Blue Prism, Automation Anywhere. We work with a company called Netbotics who do it as a service, basically out-task the process map and the automation components of that. But we really think that we can empower most users to be able to be skilled and trained to be able to do those things, basically with technology that they've implemented over the last few years, which in most cases is Microsoft stack. You know, upskilling people to use Teams, being able to use Microsoft Flow. These are things that people were able to do and actually can take ownership of. It's just about focusing on that or those areas with stakeholders and then building training plans in the organization to empower them to understand how to do that effectively. We think that's a huge area of growth over the next few years.
Amazing. Thanks, everyone. There's lots of good ways of tackling the problem there. We've got a really interesting one next. So if there was an emerging technology or disruptive technology that you would drive differently, what would it be and how would you do it? Quite an interesting one. I don't know if anyone's got any.
Oh, it's got some, isn't it? Hannah, you answer that one.
Yeah.
What do you mean by like drive forward?
Do you maybe,
differently?
assuming it means, like, would you apply it differently? Do you think maybe there's a missed opportunity in how it's being used? That's how I would take that. I don't know if the person who wrote it wants to say differently. That's it? Yeah, perfect. Okay, cool. Any missed opportunities with tech that you're seeing? We can always come back to that one later if you want to think on it. So sorry.
No, I think I'm an advocate for quantum, so everyone's going to roll their eyes. It's going to be like, how many times can Laura say quantum on the panel? But quantum is going to be a really crucial technology in the coming years, but there's so much misconception about what quantum is. You watch an episode of Star Trek and everything's like quantum this, quantum that, and you think that quantum is literally anything to do with the universe. It's not. There's going to be key quantum technologies that are going to be used in the coming years, but they're not going to revolutionize everything straight away. Quantum is going to be built into existing use cases to further optimize how they're going to be used, like that weather forecasting example or like drug discovery. So it's not so much what would I drive differently. I would make sure people have accurate awareness as to what quantum technologies are going to be, what their use cases are, and what you actually need to know to be able to access that as a business in the way that is most valuable for you. So you're not going to build your own quantum computer, you're probably going to access it through the cloud, that kind of thing. Don't know if that answers your question, but that's the one that I would go for.
An area that is, I think, in keeping with today is subjects. And I don't know, it's certainly not emerging, but just general public cloud. There's so much usage of public cloud in the traditional IaaS space. 80% of cloud is still, roughly 80% of cloud is still traditional VMs and storage. And I find it fascinating that public cloud has kind of disrupted that on-premises world when we talk about speed of innovation and all these kind of components. But not many organizations take advantage of the components that are available to do those things. And we're still seeing so many customers just using cloud as ultimately an infrastructure as a service platform. So I don't think it's a cop-out answer, but just using cloud for its right reasons in a most effective way to develop services that are going to differentiate your organization, and thinking about that in an effective way and implementing it and using services that are available. AWS has over 200 services, Azure a little bit less, and Google and others are others out there. It's about really using the options available in that suite of technology and that portfolio and understanding it. You're not going to understand everything, but you need to understand what's relevant for your business and your organization, and not just using those platforms as VMs and storage platforms. I think for me, I don't know if that's, they're disruptive in terms of what they've done to the industry, but use them in the most appropriate way. I think that, to me, is in keeping with today, because I don't see many organizations personally that are doing it very well.
Yeah, using what you've got better, like that.
Just, if you're going to use it for VMs and storage, go and buy some infrastructure and put it in a sustainable data center.
Yeah.
To be fair, I agree with that. Don't go investing in quantum until you've got your your cloud
stuff
sorted.
Yeah. Sounds good. Cool. All right, the next one. Is Softcat likely to adopt the use of NFTs or the metaverse for things like ECAT? For example, an augmented reality ECAT store. I like that one.
That's a good question.
I think yes. If this is working, I think it is now.
Yeah.
I think yes, in the medium term. I think it comes back to that point before about Softcat, like any organisation, understanding what it is our customers are asking us for and what technologies are at our disposal to help make that a reality. I think the challenge, touching on what Dean and Laura say there, is that in this revolution we find ourselves in of so much emerging tech coming about month on month, year on year, not even mentioning the rate of pace of innovation you find in public cloud alone, you slip into that trap of thinking this is the latest and greatest thing, I've got to start using this, my peers using it, my neighbours using it, so I need to be using it in some shape or form. And it's about making sure, as Dean touched on, we find the right use cases. I think with things like ECAT, for those of you familiar with the Softcat e-procurement platform, I think the next iteration of that for us is thinking about how we integrate that into other channels. So marketplace being a key example that we touched on in the earlier session, is thinking about how we can provide different routes of procurement for our customers. So at the moment, you buy through us and we buy through distribution or other channels, but how do we then plug that into marketplace so you can buy software, for example, in more than one route? And how do we start thinking about not just how you might then buy a bunch of keyboards and mices from ECAT, but how do you, as part of the session this morning, combine those things into one shipment to reduce your carbon footprint? Maybe that costs a little bit more, but the net impact on the planet is a little bit less. So things like that are on our radar. In terms of other things outside of that, I think there'll be medium-term roadmap items, not things we have immediate plans for right now, but definitely interested to capture any feedback that anyone might have around those things for us to kind of take away and have a follow-up around.
Nice, sounds good. Cool, a very topical one next. So how do you think that inflation and soaring energy prices are impacting customers' cloud plans?
I think massively. I don't want to make or draw conclusions, but you look at, for example, what's happened with SunGard in the UK. I think you could quite easily assume that maybe an element of that comes from the rate of inflation and, as you say there, increase in energy prices. I think when you look at the commitments that AWS, Microsoft and Google have around their road to net zero, and also their commitments to provide and surface intelligence around how you're using their platform, I think it's easy to assume and draw a conclusion in the right sense that moving to those platforms has a positive impact across all those areas. But as Dean mentioned, I don't think that should mean writing off all the existing on-premise things that you might do today, or naturally think you can do those all in a much different way or more efficient way with cloud. I think you definitely can, but I think you can also do those things more efficiently on-prem as well.
The only thing I'd add to that is you can't be under any illusion that prices won't go up. I mean, the public clouds are consumed-based platform, and we've already seen with Microsoft 365, there wasn't a price rise for a long time, and there was, and that caused a lot of questions, and we had to answer those. But the thing is that you're signing up for terms and conditions that reserve the right to increase, and no matter what, it's like anything with the public cloud specifically, with anything you're buying, even from a private cloud perspective, I don't think we should not think that prices are going to go up to manage or mitigate against inflation and energy prices. It's like anything. If you're building sustainable data centers, there's going to be an impact and a pass on to customer. So I think that's the challenge. You can't stop those things. It's going to happen, and at some point there's going to be price rises you can't control.
I think the final thing, just to add to that, it's potentially an opportunity for end users of cloud to review how they are using cloud, and going back to what Dean was saying before, make sure they are using it in the most optimal way that works for them.
Yeah, there's so much waste in spend still, in IT, and I think it's one of those areas that it's getting hold of that spend. We talked about FinOps earlier in one of the sessions, and that's one area. There's just your own supply chain of buying software and a hardware and implementing or allowing your organization to buy technology in the most appropriate way for the reasons that it's meant to be used for. You need to get hold of that and understand it, because we're probably going to be in a period of time over the next couple of years where costs and running costs of business are going to impact the sustainability of the business being a business. And IT has had such, I think, a luxury over the last few years of investment. So it's about reviewing that and putting it back and then making really wise decisions. And I think that's going to be a huge area. And I think technology teams and operations teams have to work closely with procurement and business leaders to ensure that happens. That's going to be huge, actually, over the next few years.
I sort of think as well, I'm sort of related, but not in the point you made there around some of the conversations and how using the platforms. I think everyone's probably using cloud to some extent right now, public cloud more so than, say, it was 5 years ago. But I still think we find conversations with customers every day where we're being asked things like, is one more expensive or cheaper than the other? And should I be putting all my eggs in one basket? Should I be thinking about failover between cloud platforms? And I think it's still quite surprising / refreshing that we're coming across those types of conversations. I think ultimately, though, in trying to think about the scenarios attached to those different challenges, you're going to ultimately limit yourselves to a lowest common denominator, which then starts to limit the value you start to get and starts to, I think, increase the price of said service. I think as someone touched on earlier, as you start to adopt more PaaS-related features and services, you drive up the level of automation and or reduce the level of overhead that you've got to maintain as part of looking after that thing versus how it was done in a traditional world, say, built on infrastructure. So I think all those things need to be considered together as well, from my perspective.
Thanks, everyone. That makes sense. So what do you feel is the most impactful yet underutilized technology or service?
Did Microsoft asked that question. My instant response would be M365. People buy it, and there's so much in it, and not many people use the suite or don't understand how to implement it. We're working on so many opportunities where, just the security features alone can, if implemented correctly, can really remove some other security vendors from an on-premises environment that might be doing something similar. So yeah, that one really stands out for me. We've sold a lot of M365 over the last few years, and we're having to constantly go in and ensure that people get the most out of that investment because there's so much available.
I would probably say of a technology which can have the most impact that is quite attainable as well is, again, just in what I would call intelligent automation, but can also be defined as like RPA technologies, for example. During COVID, during the lockdown, if we're allowed to talk about that, we saw a lot of businesses implement automation because they had to, because they were facing so many unprecedented challenges. Automation became a necessity. It wasn't a nice to have, it was a necessity. I think there was UiPath, who are automation providers, did a lot of partnering with hospitals, and they would automate things as simple as sending off blood tests. So they would come back. So they would send off blood tests, and then nurses didn't have to kind of like fill in the forms. And that freed up so much time for nurses to actually be on the ground dealing with patients. And I don't have the figures to hand right now, but they were able to kind of prove that it saved X amount of time for the nurses. And that just kind of shows how much of an impact things like intelligent automation software tools can have. But I think sometimes businesses can be a little bit scared to go near them, because when we hear the word automation, people kind of have a bit of a reaction about it.
Cool. Amazing, thank you. So next one, with global supply chain issues, AWS have announced a plan to extend the life of servers powering the cloud and networking equipment. What are your thoughts on this?
I think we touched on this morning, in that I think it's fascinating. I think we've all been centered culturally around, if you're buying hardware, whatever kind of asset that is, you probably refresh that every 3 to 5 years. And admittedly, they haven't extended it by a lot, but I think it's enough that it starts to drive out that behavior, that you've got to refresh those things as frequently. I think historically, where things maybe were a bit less reliable, maybe that was the case, but I think going forwards, where we're in a shortage of things like chipsets and other things related to supply chain that Dean touched on this morning, I think it's only a positive step. I also think it helps with things like global e-waste numbers that we presented this morning as well, in terms of driving out that refresh. So yeah, again, from my perspective, I think it's a really positive step. I think there's a lot of learnings that traditional data center providers can take from that as well, in terms of refreshing usable lifespans of associated components. So yeah, I think from that regard, it's a really positive step.
Was that on the slide I didn't bring up?
That was on the slide you didn't bring up. Thank you.
Nice. Cool. Moving on to the next one. Have you had any traditional vendors or distributors push back on marketplace, or have the majority been accepting?
So there's one that stands out for me, but I'm not going to mention who they are. But yeah, there's one data management vendor that we worked with about a year ago or so, and they, at that time, refused to put an offer on, or even any kind of listing on marketplace. I think that's since changed, but there is this, I think, fear, I guess. AWS are in the room, I think, somewhere. They're good. Amazon are a great data company, and I think there is this fear that marketplaces, they are disruptive, but disrupt the traditional models of distribution on how software is ultimately bought and sold. But they're not going away, and they're easy, as today has been shown by Darren. They're fantastic tools to be able to give you access to software in a much more effective way. But there are vendors out there that are absolutely skeptical about publishing, even still on marketplace. But that is definitely changing, because ultimately it's a route to market, and or anywhere that these software vendors can make money, I'm sure
Don't want to miss out.
that will change at some point for them. But yeah, as one stands out, that they went to the US adamant and said, we're never doing it, not going to happen. And I think since they have, but it was an interesting conversation because the customer wanted to buy their technology that way.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Be customer centric, so it makes sense.
I'll tell you if you want to know. I'll tell you.
Tell you at the drinks. Yeah.
We're not here.
Is Edge the future of cloud?
I sort of feel like Edge is one of those misunderstood areas for me, in that I think if you went back 5 years, it represented the decentralized sites that many organizations had that could have been an office that had IT in it. You could have referred to it as a manufacturing site, a mine site, all those different things that I'm sure we can think of examples of. I think now, I sort of think it gets a bit confused around what we think of Edge as. For me, I think it still encapsulates those things. It's any location where you've got a requirement to have computing of some kind close to the source, whatever that source may be. And I don't think those requirements are going away. I think there's so many cases where connectivity speed back to a central hub just isn't up to the level that it needs to be to then facilitate centralization. So in my view, I don't think it's anything that different to what we've been doing for so many years. I think it's a bit of a rebadging of something else in my view.
I think with Edge, I guess with cloud and computing in general, you see these kind of back and forth moves, like everyone's like, let's get everything to the cloud, and now they're kind of realizing that no, there needs to be specific use cases for each, and there'll be an amalgamation of these two technologies kind of working together to develop Cloud Edge. At TechUK, we have a very broad definition of edge computing as well. We just class it as distributed computing close to the source of the data. But we do know that, I think it's Gartner, there's the stat out there, which is by 2025, 75% of all data created is going to be computed at the edge. And that is because the amount of data, as we all know, the amount of data that we generate is going to absolutely explode. And it makes zero sense from an optimization or an efficiency perspective to send all of that data to be analyzed in the cloud. So what we're going to start to see is very specific use cases where edge is going to be that kind of, I guess, like final point where that data will be looked at, and then only what is necessary goes back. And then we're also going to see use cases where it just makes so much more sense to have edge do the computing in kind of like wind farms in the middle of the North Sea as well, for example. But I would say I really think there's a lot of misconceptions over what edge is, and I think if we're going to talk about edge being the future, you need to actually understand what edge is first.
That's a bit of a recurring theme here, isn't it? Yeah.
I think we're the edge as well, right? As modern people with connected devices that we wear, walk around with, etc., we represent the edge as well, in my view.
Yeah. Nice. Exciting. Cool. So I think we touched on the next one a little bit, but if there's anything anyone wants to expand on. So automation was mentioned in the keynote. What would you define that as, and does the future of it look like? So anything to add to what we've already discussed, I guess.
Just reiterate the intelligent automation piece, RPA, but obviously there's infrastructure as code. We're seeing a lot more organizations needed to automate how they deploy workloads more effectively, and that's upskilling the operations teams to do that. Developers are doing it. They're using their CI/CD pipelines, deploying applications and in an effective way for them. We've got a little picture as well.
Yeah.
Someone's taken time, haven't they? Yeah, so I mean, there's a whole range of automation, but certainly the immediate one for an impact is ones we spoke about today.
I'd just add, if automation is the future, it can only be the future if we make sure that no one's left behind with it. So upskilling is going to be so crucial, and to make sure that those who are going to be most affected by automation, those who might be in jobs that are less secure because of automation, you need to make sure that those people have the opportunity to be upskilled as well. That's
a really important point. I think it touches a bit on the next question as well. So we've talked a bit about upskilling and about the cloud skills gap, but how would you recommend that we further our knowledge and on building cloud skills and understanding more about emerging tech? Any routes that you recommend?
I think in terms of building cloud skills, it comes down to what it is you need. And I think, as harsh as it might sound, I think you have to look at your organization to figure out how easy or difficult it might be for you to attract the skills that you might need. And I say that in the context of if you took a massive brand like a Netflix, probably going to be really easy for them to attract the right skills they think they need for their business, and probably to retain those because they're working on something that's really cool, exciting, and the whole planet's using and consuming. I think if your business is much smaller or for a completely different scale where your brand isn't as well known, you might find it generally harder to attract skills. And Softcat's no exception in that process. If you go back 3 or 4 years, what Softcat did in the cloud space probably was not what it is today. And as such, had to go through a big journey to find and bring in the right skills we wanted to grow our business. So I think the first thing is understanding what skills you think you're missing and want to have, and then think about seriously how you might go about finding those. I think once you've figured those things out, I think the routes are either you look to upskill existing people, you bring new ones in. I think in either case, you need to think about how you look at what your pool of recruitment is that you're going to, as we touched on before, have deep pockets, work with recruitment agencies and bring in that expensive resource, but do so on the basis that those people might then be headhunted or cherry-picked by other organisations in the future? Or do you start with a more ground-up approach and look to bring in new talent right from the source, say straight out of school or college? I think my view would be the latter, you aim for that. I think in both cases, you've then got to think about what the lead time is to bring in that skill set and upskill them to help with the things that you need them to help with. Because in either case, there'll be a learning curve for them to get familiar with your business, which takes time, or familiar with the problem that you're facing, and or be familiar with whatever it is you're asking them to do. If they're a brand new person straight out of school or college, they might be self-taught to an extent, but there'll still be an upskill period for them to learn about that piece of technology versus someone with that experience that then needs to get upskilled with what your business is doing, whether you're trying to do something in the right way, maybe you need to change direction. So I think I'd be looking at that. You then got all the very traditional routes of, you could go through various formal training routes, but I think, again, what we're seeing a lot of is a lot more self-taught people. That I also think brings its own challenges, that as a society, we reward the people that are most skilled, typically based on like certifications, qualifications. Does that mean they're the best person for the job? Probably argue not in today's society, because again, you've got this self-taught nature. So probably not a direct answer to the question, but I think all those things need to be considered as part of thinking about what your upskill program looks like.
I think because the skills challenge is so perverse, just so widespread, we've seen a lot of individual companies kind of go at it themselves. So they're partnering with specific universities, specific sixth form colleges, for example. But obviously a lot of them are then creating their own, often free to access resources where you can get a good base level knowledge of what cloud is and how it's being used, and kind of go from there. And so you'll find that your company already has those resources that you can access to kind of learn more about cloud and what's happening. For more of a general emerging technology kind of overview, shameless plug, but TechUK has a lot of resources, lots of events, all that good stuff around different forms of emerging technologies, kind of a little bit more at this high level. But if you want to learn about what the metaverse is, for example, we did an event last week where we talked about how the UK tech sector is going to use the metaverse. So shameless plug.
Amazing. And before we come on to the most important question, your favourite topic, Laura, with every increasing technologies such as quantum, do you think companies that fail to keep up will be left further and further behind?
Yes. Your competitors are already looking in this space, and I know because they're TechUK members and I'm working with them on this, and they're in TechUK's quantum working group. Your competitors and people in this ecosystem are already looking at these technologies, and if you are not already looking at these technologies, yes, you are going to be left behind. But that might seem really overwhelming, kind of like, how am I supposed to keep up to date with all these new technologies and all these new all these new words that kind of come about all the time that you can't even keep on top of? So the one advice that I would give is have a solid digital strategy within your company that really sets a strong foundation about how you're going to go about adopting new technologies. And that also make sure that all the kind of products and services that you use are interoperable. So if your CRM isn't talking to your website, you're not going to be able to have your CRM talking to your website in the metaverse, for example. So get the foundations right before you then start adopting all these other technologies.
And then, Dean, did your legs get cold?
That was one reason.
Yeah.
The other one, I looked at the chairs and I figured that eye line, where my shorts were, might be a problem.
With the photographer right down there as well.
Yeah, so I figured I'll put my trousers on, because this man here, I'm sure.
Pleased that the trousers
Down the barrel.
You don't want to, yeah. So yeah, so it was a strategic choice.
Nice. Okay, cool.
For everybody's benefit.
Did anyone have any? We've got some roving mics if anyone had anything. I think a lot of questions have gone on to Slido, but was there anything else that anyone wanted to ask our panelists? You can catch them at the networking drinks as well, if there's anything else. Cool. And then we have one last Slido for you today, just to finish off. I think our panelists might have a quick comment on it as well before we finish. What would you say your key challenges are in cloud? So if you just maybe vote on the one which is your top challenge. So we've got accessing the right skills, which you talked a lot about just now, managing costs, modernizing your cloud estate, keeping up with the pace of change, and managing your security and compliance. So that's in Slido, but obviously in the audience for Softcat and TechUK room, if you can't find it. So keeping up with the pace of change and winning at the moment. Panelists, is this what you expected to see? Any surprises? Still going. Yeah, definitely clear winner at the moment.
I think the first one's interesting because it comes back to the question around upskilling and Laura, your point there around getting left behind. I think regardless whether that stays at the top there or not, I think one of the beauties and real benefits you get is the ability to experiment. Clearly gone are the days of having to buy lots of expensive equipment, put it in your site to play around with, and then decide, actually, I don't need this thing anymore, it's not doing quite what I wanted to do, or I need to work in a bit of a different way. And I think that is the key to embracing the pace of change and emerging tech, is to experiment with it. You might not know going into it what you want it to do, but I think unless you play around with it, get to grips with what it can do for you, you won't get a grip on what the potential there is for your business. Equally, that's not to say that what you do with it is the right thing either. So I think the key there is also come to events, whether it's like this or other ones that are more specialist in those areas. Pre-pandemic, there were lots of amazing meetups that happened in different areas as such as those, where you could go along and listen to industry experts from, say, a Microsoft, an AWS, or a reputable cloud partner in the UK to understand how to use those things. I think that gives you a really good step up that ladder in terms of, am I using this thing in the right way? Is it going to work for my business as I think it will? And what can it do for my business? That'd be my comment against the first one, at least.
Yeah, experimenting is key, but it's also really exciting, right? The fact that you can access quantum computing through the cloud, Oxford Quantum Circuits, really cool company, definitely do a little bit of research on them. You can access their quantum computer through AWS, so that kind of brings that level of accessibility to be able to experiment with this technology. Also, the National Quantum Computing Centre is aiming to do that as well. I'm surprised that skills has gone up for a minute. Skills was at the bottom. Yeah. What do you think about security and compliance being at the bottom?
Where's Kieran?
Yeah, so where's Kieran?
It's a bit of an interesting one. I think like 10 years ago, there was this big apprehension that is cloud more or less secure than it was on premise. I'm sure everyone's heard that argument. I'm sure everyone's also really familiar with the work, for example, AWS's security and compliance program have got certifications probably 6 foot long in terms of the list. So I think there's so much work that's gone into making sure those platforms are as secure as they can be. That's not to say you can misconfigure them and then be subject to vulnerability, but I just sort of feel like it's a bit of a, as you mentioned before, a bit of a peaks and troughs point in terms of, I think cloud's very secure. I think it's probably as secure, if not, than on-premise can be. And I think ultimately it's down to how you're individually configuring and using it that introduces vulnerability. So not surprised to see it at the bottom, not surprised to see it on the list. I know we put it on there, but it's on there for a reason. That's my view of it.
Cool. Amazing. I think we're out of time now, so just want to say thank you very much for joining us. We hope you got some valuable insights and hope you enjoyed hearing the panelists answer your questions. So thanks for coming and thanks to the panelists. And I'll just hand over to Dean to wrap up, I think, the day as you started off.
Yes. So yeah, thank you all for joining us today. It's been fascinating. And thank you to all our marketing team for organising today. Thank you to the venue, it's been fantastic. Thank you to the crew at the back for making us work and our mics work, etc., and the screens work, so brilliant. And more importantly, thank you to everybody for joining us, listening, joining in, answering the polls, etc. I can't promise gourmet burgers afterwards, but I can promise you a drink downstairs in the dungeon. So please join us.
And canapes.
And canapes, there we go. So maybe you might get a gourmet burger. You'll definitely get some cheese and there's some wine. So enjoy. Thank you so much. Come again next year. We'll probably do it again. Who knows? We'll see. Depends if they're going to pay for it again upstairs. Enjoy. Thank you. Go. Leave.